My name is Tanya, and you can find me on Instagram as TKnitPearl, as well as on Instagram. And I'd like to welcome you today to the Creative Knit Tensions podcast, a knitting, crochet, quilting, sewing, general crafty things podcast. We do have a Ravelry group that you can find on, yeah, you guessed it, Ravelry, just by searching Creative Knit Tensions under the groups tab in Ravelry. Today's segments include Done and Over, Just Keep Spinning, Whip It, Tips and Ahas, and Lust and Must. So before we get into any of that, just a little bit of kind of general housekeeping. Some of you may be returning visitors, and if you are, I thank you so much for taking the time to spend with me today. I know there are so many knitting podcasts out there, and even with the kind of summer hiatus that a lot of podcasts have taken, there's still a lot of choices, and so I really do appreciate you guys being here. The same holds true if you're new. I appreciate you taking the time to, get your first experience of the Creative Knit Tensions podcast. But if you are returning, you may notice that it appears as if we have just magically abandoned number 9 and skipped from episode 8 to episode 10. You may have also noticed there's been a bit of a gap between episodes, and so the explanation for both of those things is the same. I wasn't sure if I was going to try and continue this, because I have very few people listening, although I very greatly appreciate those of you who are. And podcasting can be a lot of work, and so I was in a really down kind of place, and I'd done episode 9, and it was basically kind of like, here's what I'm working on, here it is, hope you like it, by the way, I'm depressed, episode over. And I never released it because it was a little bit depressing, to be honest. And who wants to be depressed in a knitting or a crochet or a general fiber-ness podcast? I mean, I don't know about why you guys watch a lot of knitting podcasts, but one of the bigger reasons I do it is to be a part of a community. And so I love sitting down with my favorite podcasts, some knitting, some spinning, a cup of my favorite beverage, sometimes my favorite pet if it's being particularly nice that day. And, just relaxing. For me, it's a great form of relaxation, and while I'm at work listening to audio podcasts, it gives me a way to kind of still stay involved with the community that I love so much while, I'm making the money to make the yarn, full cycle there, full cycle. So that kind of explains the gap, and that also explains kind of the renewed interest in this podcast. I'm going to truly try, and get back to a bi-weekly schedule, and we'll see where this goes. There might be a point where I stop doing this because, nobody but me is listening. And if that day comes, that's fine. I'm okay with it. Or there might be a day where I never want to stop doing this because I do enjoy it so much. We're gonna, I'm not clairvoyant, so I can't see the future. We're gonna let the future happen as it happens. And so, getting all of that kind of like sad, I used to have a friend in college that we just called Debbie Downer. So, let's get all that Debbie Downer stuff out of the way and talk about why any of us really are here. And that has to do with the yarny, fibery, crafty goodness stuff. So, starting with our first segment, Done and Over. Let's review a couple of things So, starting with our first segment, Done and Over. This is kind of the segment where we talk about things that I've recently finished, and they're done, and they're over. I know, I got really clever in naming these segments, as you guys can tell. I'm sure you're going to think I'm the most clever person in the world. I'm entirely joking, and I'm sorry for how loud that laugh must be, especially if you're on headphones. But the first thing, I really only have 3 projects to show you guys that are done and over. Part of that is because I'm I'm limiting kind of this section just to knit or crochet or other, things, and keeping the spinning stuff in a separate section. But also because, as we talked about in episode 6 and 7 and 8, and we talked about in 9 with all the other Debbie Downer stuff, I've been lacking knit gel. I can't find my knit gel. It's lost, and I have no idea where it went, but as a result, I haven't been finishing things with my normal vigor or excitement or speed, and that's kind of showed. And I do know what a good part of that is, and that actually has to do with what I'm wearing. So let me move the hair a little bit out of the way, and you can see a little bit of it. This is my Linum tee. Now, the Linum tee is a pattern by Bristol Ivy, and it was featured in maybe I want to say about 2 or 3 years ago in an issue of Knitsy magazine. I did this out of Big Shock Nerd Girl Yarns in their winning base, which is a 30% silk, 70% linen, or it's a linen silk blend, but mostly, it's 70% silk, 30% linen. And as you can see, there are problems. Part of this is blocking. I made a mess of the blocking. The hair kind of hides it, so we're going to go with that. But it's a beautiful color. The color is called A Shrubbery, and if you go to the Nerd Girl website, you'll see it on another base, and you'll see it's a much more vibrant and bright color, but on linen and silk, it really dyes entirely differently. And I'm just gonna put it out there. I do not like working with non-wool fibers. That's right, I said it. Controversial opinion number 1 of the day. This is the second thing that I've tried in an entirely non-wool animal fiber combination this summer, and I think it's contributed significantly to why I've been so out of my knit gel. I did alter the pattern so that this top portion that you see here, and also is a little smaller portion in the back, is supposed to be done in a fisherman rib. I didn't do that. I decided to do a basic brioche stitch because it's easier for my knitting style. And on top of that, I was just so done and over it. I was like, what's going to get it done fastest? And fisherman rib they're commonly confused for one another, so I figured, why not? Well, it turns out I don't know how to block non-linen, non-wool bases, and so this has become quite the disaster. And so I don't know if I'm going to try and reblock it, or I don't know if I'm going to try and give it to a friend who is a similar size. The fit's also entirely different. And those of you who might be familiar with the pattern can probably see that immediately. This is supposed to be a baggy oversized t-shirt, and I chose a baggy oversized t-shirt size, and I did a gauge swatch for a baggy oversized t-shirt size, and it ain't baggy. It's also not very t-shirty. It's kind of this like under bust thing in the front, and I don't really know where that went wrong. So I'm going to chalk it up to the fact that I don't like working with non-wool based yarns and move on from there. My second done is a shawl. I have, like many other people, been bitten by the Helen Stewart bug. I'd shown on one of the last episodes that I had done her Talesman shawl out of her Shawl Society pattern collection, and immediately went back to the Spindrift shawl, which is technically free if you sign up for her email workshop, which is free, or you can pay for the pattern on Ravelry. And I went ahead and made it, and I'm a little bit in between on this shawl. So the yarn used here is an unknown color of Mano Steel Uruguay in the Allegria base that I purchased from my local yarn store. Right when the yarn had first come out. Originally for a knit along that the group was doing for a scarf. My first, the pattern was a dream to work with. The yarn I've worked with before, but it's a dream to work with, and I did it in a little bit of a tighter gauge, and so I love how that stock knit worked out. I mean, it's just it gives such a good feel. Here's the part about this shawl that kind of was similar to this top. If you look at the pattern for the Helen Stewart shawl and the photos that she does, you'll see the shawl, you'll see the shawl, you'll see the shawl, you'll see the shawl. You won't see the end of the shawl right there. Her version is much, 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 much deeper than mine. At its deepest, this is about as deep as it gets, and that's not very deep. That's, roughly about 7 inches, 12, 14 inches. It's not very deep at all. So I don't know what's up with that. I did do the picot bind off. I love the way picot bind offs look, but I hate working them. So I don't know if I'll ever do another picot bind off, but I do have to say it does add a simple, beautiful touch to this pattern. And I love the way that the orangey, kind of yellowy shades, borderline pinks and browns. This is just such a fall feeling colorway. So I'm going to wear it for fall. We're going to see. I might actually, this is loosely blocked, so I soaked it and I just kind of laid it out to dry. I might see what happens if I actually pin it out. So maybe it will grow, maybe it won't. I am pretty stoked about it, but I do wish it was bigger. I mean, I personally idolize everything that Helen Stewart does, but it's funny because her afternoon tea pattern, which was originally featured in Knitting Magazine, was a fray pattern, and the measurements for the pattern there called it or referred to it as shawlette. And when I did the pattern, it ended up being so huge. I love that thing. But since then, all of my Helen Stewart patterns turn out small. Maybe it's life revenge. I don't really know. My last finished object for the Done and Done section is I finally finished my breezy cardigan. And I'm not going to kind of like full on display this just because it's really difficult. And if those of you who are aware, New York is kind of the oven of the universe right now. And so it is 1,020 degrees. Our real feel weather today is actually 120 degrees. And I've been having a lot of trouble with my asthma, and guys, it's just hot, and it smells like it, and I smell like it, if we're being really honest. And so I can't put on any more clothes. You guys are lucky I'm wearing pants. So this is my first lace weight cardigan. It is done out of the Woot base from Nerd Girl Yarns in the Space Age Clockwork colorway. And it is designed by Hannah Fettig. And so it has these wide open front panels that you can see here. It's a little bit shorter in length. And it's beautiful. I really enjoy the way that the sweater worked out, to be honest. I didn't think last time that I would ever finish it. It was one of those projects where it's funny. I hear, Sue from the Legacy Knits podcast and her Periscope group talking about, fingering weight cardigans. And I hear a lot of people say, oh, I don't know if I can psych myself up for a fingering weight cardigan. I don't know, or if they've done one, it's that, I don't know if I could do it again. It's tough. I've got to get the power together to do it again. And I'm like, man, fingering weight cardigans are easy for me, especially after doing that. After doing a lace, if you feel like you have any trouble or any hesitation in doing a fingering weight cardigan, I urge you, try a lace weight cardigan, and you're going to be like, oh, yeah, I love fingering weight, because that's personally how I feel right now. For our next segment, Just Keep Spinning, again, you'll appreciate the cleverness of that name. I want to talk a little bit about Tour de Fleece. In episode 9 that, again, you guys are never going to see. It's going to be like the lost episode. I'd shown you some of the things that I was working on for Tour de Fleece. And during Tour de Fleece, one of the things that I was working on was this beauty right here. So this is, I do not know the colorway, but it is a thing braid of fiber that I purchased this year at Rhinebeck from Holiday Fibers. It is this blue and purple and light pink, sparkly goodness of the universe kind of colorway. And I soaked it, so it smells so good. It's actually very soft to the touch. It's a mostly merino silk blend. And for Tour de Fleece, I was spinning this, what I thought was a really fine single. This weekend, I pulled it out and spun the rest of it and kind of plied it together. And so you can see in some places, it's a little bit thicker than in other places, and in some places, it's a little bit thinner. I'd like to get to the point in my spinning where, let me get a good strand of it, where all of my spinning, or rather all of my plying, looks really, really tight. Like some of the stuff that you'll see in this section. That's the kind of spinning I love. And so this actually ended up working out to being about 280 yards. I have one of those wraps per inch measures from Hip Strings that I need to figure out what weight this is, because this is the first time I've ever made anything with my hands, or that I've ever made hand spun, and I've been like, I gotta cast that on. I have to cast this on. So we'll see what kind of weight it is, and we'll work from there. My second finished spinning object is a bat of Shropshire wool in the Chill Pill colorway from Nerd Girl Yarns. And I learned a lot when spinning this. You guys can probably see how very, very fuzzy and uneven it is. And there was just no way for this not to be. I learned one of the bigger things that I learned when spinning this is when I was spinning it on the wheel, it had a very rough feel to it. It really did. Or at least for me, my delicate little baby hands. But it was mostly pretty thin. When I soaked it and twacked it out, not so thin anymore. Nope. It really bloomed. And so looking at the differences between these two, now obviously the one on the left is plied. It just struck me as so amazing because I felt like I was spinning both of these, and according to my sampling, they were both kind of spun to the same consistency, but they look so different because of how this bloomed up. And this feels like Brooklyn tweed. And so that's obviously not an insult to Brooklyn tweed or to my little hand spun over here, but if you're familiar with Brooklyn tweed yarns, they have a certain rustic hand to them. Or Harrisville Designs, which is, the same mill and whatnot. And I know so many people who love that rustic feel, and sometimes I want that rustic feel. And when I do, I have this for that, because it has that same rustic feel to it. I wouldn't necessarily want it for anything that would touch me a lot, but I'm still glad I spun it. I learned a lot from doing that. In our Whippet section, you'll notice I took off my Linum tee because, again, it is just the center of the universe out here, and so I put on a little shawlette to keep my shoulders non-freezing with the air conditioning we have blasting. I wanted to show you guys two of the whips that I'm working on. So the first one is actually tied to what I'm wearing. I mentioned that I have caught the Helen Stewart bug, and I have indeed caught the Helen Stewart bug. I am currently working on her summer tied shawl, and I haven't gotten very far. I'm just in kind of the lace section and that's not going to show very well, but the lace section. This colorway is oval fingering in their Juneberry colorway. this is my color A. My color B is going to be this beauty, this speckly goodness, which is Bounce and Stomp from Nerd Girl Yarns in the Osgood colorway. It is, oh gosh, guys, it is, there's all kinds of speckles in there, and I know my horrific lighting's not helping you guys see it, but it's yellow and oranges and purples and little spots of blues and greens and sweetness and goody, 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 goody. I think they're going to be a perfect pair together. I'm really excited for this, but sitting down, for me, lace is intensive. I have to kind of like sit down and watch what I'm doing. And so with the heat, I just haven't been able to really get on it as much as I wish that I could, because that would be perfect for, you know, wearing towards the end of the summer. My second work in progress is a hot mess. Jenny from the Handmade and Woolen podcast has spoken about before commuter knitting, and so this project ended up today at the bottom of my bag and was a hot mess. But this is the Liesel or Liesel cardigan from Yizel Datique. I am using Luscious from Nerd Girl Yarns in the Supermassive Black Hole colorway. I'm doing the cap sleeve version. The color is not going to show here in the way that it should, but it is, you know, dark purples and light purples and little pops every once in a while of almost a white. And I'm about this much through. It is work top down. So, you know, about that much past the sleeves. I've got a bit of a way to go. But it's about 400 yards, and it really shouldn't take that long. I actually just made one of these for a friend in a swap, and it is now currently living in Colorado. It was done in about a week and a half, so I'm pretty optimistic for mine. Our next segment is tips and ahas. So you guys might remember when I was working on my Breezy cardigan out of this lace weight yarn that I bought an extra skein of just to be careful, that I was miserable because I have always been a really loose knitter. And when I say I've always been a really loose knitter, and people don't tend to believe me, but I have knit sweaters that call for a size 10 needles in US US ones. And so normally I kind of just tension my yarn. I am a continental knitter, and I do knit out of the back loop only, so I know that's a bit of a throw for people, but normally I just tension my yarn like this. I lay it over my hand, and here's where it feeds my project. What I kind of learned when doing this cardigan, however, was that I can play around with how I tension things. So for example, if I'm looking for me, and this is only for me, to knit, say, a pair of socks at a, you know, respectable sock gauge, I have this yarn from Miss Babs right here in her Hot Shot base. I can wrap it once, twice around my wrist, come up through the index finger and kind of get it stuck on my wedding ring, come back down and under, and have it feed from here. And this will keep it nice and tight without me having, you know, to really be insane about it. I've also learned within that I don't just have to hold yarn like this. I can be comfortable. You know, normally the reason that I would hold it like this is because that's just how I've always done it. That's how it's comfortable. And, you know, you can just drop down sizes to be a less loose knitter. But I've also learned that there are other configurations for me that are a little bit simpler than all that wrapping jazz, that'll still give me a little bit more of a normal gauge. So, for example, I can kind of just go over my wedding ring like that and come up like that, just kind of feeding it through my hand and the yarn would feed this way towards my knitting needle. Definitely gives me a much more reasonable gauge without exhausting me or making me feel tired, because a lot of the tensioning styles that I had tried to kind of keep the yarn taut when it comes off the finger right here, to keep this nice and taut, would hurt my hands. I'd start to have a lot of pain all through here, and it just made knitting entirely unenjoyable. And what I realized is the reason for that is, for me at least, I would be sitting there and I'd be like, must keep yarn tight, must keep yarn tight. And so I would do more damage, and knitting wasn't fun and knitting wasn't relaxing. But I could play around with how I was tensioning it. You know, sometimes even just wrapping twice around the pinky and coming here. And relax. None of, you know, not holding my hand like this. This is just for demonstration purposes. But I could relax my hand. And I could still get a pretty decent gauge out of that. And so I guess the tip and aha here that I'm urging all of you guys to try is play around with your tensioning style, whether you're knitting with your yarn in your right hand or with your yarn in your left hand. There are a lot of different things that you can explore. And I know, for example, I have a friend who tensions like 3 times around her middle finger and twice around her index finger. So something like that for knitting English, and she just finds it easier to flick that way. Maybe, you know, you do that as well, or maybe you've never heard of that before. And so, like I said, I encourage you to play around with your knitting style, or not with your knitting style, but with your knitting tensioning method, because you don't know what you're going to end up with until you do. And you might actually be able to knit something you never thought you could, like, I don't know, a lace weight cardigan. I can still see you. You might be able to do something like that, just with a little bit of a tweak or a modification to your skill set. So, for our last segment, Lust and Must, I want to talk about some of the things that I plan to work on next. Pretty much my plans are to finish what's on the needle, so the Summertide Shawl and the Liesel or Liesel, never going to pronounce that right, cardigan. But I also want to cast on another pullover by Hannah Fettig. So the Coastal pullover is a fully all-over cable pattern. For those of you who have watched this podcast before, you're probably going, don't you hate cables? Well, yes, I do. Thank you for remembering. I absolutely hate cables. But one of my knitting resolutions for the year was to knit a cable pullover, and I love this pullover. It is so stunning. It's just simple cables everywhere. And I have this yarn that I purchased last year at Rhinebeck. This is Neighborhood Fiber Company. This is some colorway. Really helpful to you guys, but all of their colorway, I mean, you cannot go to their website and not find a colorway that you don't love. So I'm not really concerned if you guys are looking for this or something else. You'll find something you love on that site. But I have 3 skeins of this that I got at Rhinebeck that would be perfect for that pullover. And so I plan to get a start on that before the next episode. Maybe. We'll see how far things get. You never know with me. I change my mind a lot. So that's all for today, folks. I hope you kind of enjoy our refreshed episode. And it's still going to try and do this bi-weekly. And again, I thank those of you who are new or returning for joining us today. It's been a great time kind of just hanging out with you. My beverage of choice today has been the caffeine factory known as PepsiCo. And I hope you enjoyed whatever beverage, adult or otherwise you were drinking. And we'll see you next time. You can still find me on Ravelry or on Instagram as TKnitPearl, and you can find this group on Ravelry under the groups tab by searching for Creative Knit Tensions.